Good morning, you beautiful bastards. I am Wantola. This is the project file for my track Welcome, and I am going to spend the next minutes explaining the creative process that brought us here. Of course, the haters are going to say I'm only doing this because YouTube's algorithm rewards long-form content like track breakdowns over short-form content like actual music, but to that I say, yep, Welcome has sort of a gothic flavor to it. It's basically Castlevania rhythm. I wanted to make something that sounded like a ragtag group of adventurers reaching the end of an NES cartridge-sized journey that leads them straight to the doorstep of a castle housing the androgynous visual kei power metal vampire aristocrat that's been plaguing their land with his evil minions. And so that ideal is basically going to influence every major creative decision that we make. Mostly I tried to get that atmosphere by adding in a bunch of elements from Baroque classical music, but since I don't have a music major or anything, and I don't really listen to a lot of Beethoven or whatever, would Beethoven even be Baroque? So instead, we basically just rip off a bunch of Baroque stereotypes, like, say, a lot of harpsichord, and, of course, harmonic minor scales. We're also going to be using melodies with a lot of motion, because back in the day the nobles could afford the very best of the very best to come serenade them. And the very best of the very best would demonstrate to the world that they were, in fact, the very best of the very best by filling out their melodies with tons of extra notes in a way that we will explain once we get to it. Of course, nowadays, anyone can just look on YouTube, find some Dylan Tallchief tutorial with a title like How to Be a Baroque-Ass Bitch, and learn how to do this stuff in like 5 minutes. Or you could just, load up Spotify, cue up 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence. Music used to mean something, god damn it, I want to feel special. Of course, this is a modern electronic track with some modern production techniques. Like, for example, these Choirs of the Damned. We actually got that by just taking one sample, flipping it backwards, for extra satanic subliminal messaging points, and loading it up into the sequencer. I believe we are automating the fine pitch of each note, from the looks of it, yeah. Randomizing the velocity a little, so that each note comes through at a different volume. The fine pitch also controls the speed at which each sample plays back, as well as changing the timbre just a little bit. And, of course, randomizing the panning of each note. That sort of creates the impression that these voices are coming at you from all over the place, creating this soundscape of pure evil. So that's that. We've also got... Okay, confession time, I haven't actually looked at this project file in months, so I don't actually know what most of these things are, but we will just audition them one by one and see what's going on. That sounds like some kind of resynthesis. I wonder what poignant narration about human nature we hit in this one.
Are you trying to have sex with me?
Okay then. Yeah, basically what we did for this was take, well, that, load it into Harmor, slow it down a lot, compress it to keep the volume about the same, and run it through Valhalla Shimmer, which basically takes, well, you heard that clip, pretty much anything, and turns it into a satisfying ASMR-ish wash of sound. And here's where we start to introduce that harpsichord, but not immediately. So instead of having the harpsichord fade in, like with the volume, what we're doing instead is automating a low-pass filter. If something's further away, usually, in addition to just being quieter, it'll also have less high frequencies because the air sort of acts as a low-pass filter. It's not as good at transmitting high frequencies as it is at transmitting low frequencies, so the further away something is, the fewer high frequencies it'll have. Now, in terms of the melody itself, I mentioned that we're taking something relatively simple and filling in the gaps to create a lot more motion than you'd usually have. We've mostly got two tools for that. One of them is just scale runs, you know, moving up and down that harmonic minor scale from earlier, and the other one is pedal points. Pedal points are when you fill in the gaps in a melody by switching back and forth between the melody itself and a note in the chord that you are playing. So right here, as I was saying, so right here we've got a C diminished chord, that's C, E flat, and F sharp. So we're switching back and forth between this top. This is something you actually hear a lot in metal riffs. So like, you could start with a melody that goes... and turn that into... Congratulations, you just found out how to write like half of all metal riffs. Actually, about that chord progression. It's got some diminished chords here and there, mostly on the second scale degree, I believe. The minor scale set up so that the second degree is actually a diminished chord, and you don't really hear that a lot in contemporary music, but it does tend to come up a little more in classical music, so there's that. And we've got this little bit of chicanery at the end. We're starting on a B sus4 chord, and revolving that to a B major chord. And since this is a harmonic minor scale, you've got that major 5 chord to work with at the end, which in this case, since we're in the key of E minor, would be B major. And that resolves back to the root really nicely. Anyway, let's fucking rock. Guitar part, pretty much just playing the same thing as the harpsichord. Supported by the harpsichord itself. And this pizzicato string thing. Off in the distance a little. Sub-bass way at the bottom to support the lows. Rhythm guitars just above that. Track twice, one take pan left, one right. And we've actually got 2 layers of drums. Got that usual kick and snare, and we've got this metal kit. We're synthesizing our own kick and snare for this. The kick is pretty easy. You've got a sine wave for the body. One trick I'm doing is going into the miscellaneous tab, going down here, and changing the root note, so that when I play a C, the note that comes out is an E. If you use the step sequencer, the note that it plays is a middle C. And you can sort of trick FL Studio into playing the pitch that you want, which in this case would be an E, because that's the root of the key. Envelope on the pitch, envelope on the volume, add a bit of noise, put an EQ on it to cut out all the mids, nice spike in the highs, tons of lows for the body. There you go. And you probably know how to make a snare by now, right? Start with a sine wave, pitch envelope to give it a little impact, noise for the transient and crack, put them together, distort, compress, you have a thing. Well, this snare has a little something extra. What we're doing here is using the peaking filter in the EQ, automating the gain on it. So there's that little spike in the upper mids, and we can use that to make a little ping out of the noise. And since the noise doesn't come in until after the body does, your ear sort of interprets it as 2 separate elements in the snare. 2 different physical objects making that sound. So you get this. We've got this nice bit of interplay between the lead and rhythm guitars. Or just for a little bit, the rhythm guitars are actually harmonizing with the leads down an octave or so. Build up. You'll also notice, and this is actually something I do in a lot of tracks, that we're not actually using any backup percussion over the main drums. We're just using the crashes and hi-hats and whatever from the metal kit. Easy peasy. Big fancy taiko loop. I believe this is going to be Master Session Ensemble drums from Heaviosity. Again, we're using the metal kit for backup percussion over this build-up. Just this ride bell loop. And you have to ask yourself, is it really a dubstep track without a good drop shout?
Welcome to the end game!
Welcome to the end game, bitches. So, that's me screaming. I'm not a particularly good screamer, but I can kind of pull off a fry scream. And to make up for it, I layered it 3 times, each in a slightly different register. We've got
Welcome to the end game!
not exactly a guttural, but kind of a low-mid scream.
Welcome to the end game!
Mid-range, and
Welcome to the end game! Yeah.
And in fact, to beef things up even further,
Welcome to the end game!
that's actually noise. And we're using the fry screams to vocode it into something at least resembling a human voice.
Welcome to the end game!
So I wanted to try something a little different for the sound design in this drop. The lead sound in this drop is actually this, which I believe is a single sample of a harpsichord. We're using FL Studio's built-in arpeggiator to add in a filter sweep every other beat, and we're actually automating how fast the arpeggiator goes. This right here. And that's the core of the drop. Everything else basically just depends on what kind of stuff is missing in what kind of frequencies. So for example, we've got this sub bass at the bottom plus a growl. Towards the end of each note, you can sort of hear that it gets a lot shriekier and noisier. We're actually automating the noise level so that it increases over time. And we've got this second oscillator here. I made them by drawing in the harmonic editor up here. You can see we're using this oscillator to accent a few harmonics in the mid-range. And then over here, it just kind of goes completely off the rails, way up into the upper mids. And we've got 2 harmonics right next to each other. Yeah, just a little bit of evolution over time to give it a bit of flavor, but it still feels just a little empty. So we add in some supersaws to fill in the highs. We're switching back and forth between E minor and B major to get that extra thick harmonic minor resolution. Mid-range could use a little padding, so we add in some choirs. And there's this big gap between the sub and like about maybe 500 hertz. Yeah. I've noticed this trend in I've noticed this trend in modern EDM to keep that whole range quote-unquote clean. Like, it's true that if you have too much stuff going on in that range, it will muddy up your sound just a little. But, come on. So I did this. Little cello riff to add some motion, because everything else is just playing half notes, pretty much. Put it all together, and you get this. Everything else, you're mostly going to be seeing a lot of audio clips and a lot of instances of Fruity Granulizer, which I use to process samples. Like for this guy here, we're actually starting with this. And then we can do stuff with that. Mostly though, we're just automating the stereo width. What that does is it sort of puts every other grain off to the side by a certain amount. So here you can sort of tell everything's right down the middle. But if I turn the panning knob all the way up, and And that is one of the many, many scummy little ways you can add stereo width to something. I've actually got a separate arrangement in the playlist editor just for sound design. What we have here is just a bunch of patterns that we're playing on different instances of, well, honestly, it's mostly just Serum. This guy right here, nothing special at first. At least not until we put a phaser on it. And then this little trick I use, where you've got this envelope, you've got your EQ, I've got the two bands set to low pass and high pass. You take one envelope and you use the mod matrix to basically map it to the low and high frequencies, but you do it twice. That way, both of these filters are sweeping down through the entire spectrum. You've got all your usual rhythm crap. And after that, I basically just bounce everything out and drag it into the project. Psst. Nobody tell Revolve I use his snares as placeholders. We've got this LFO effect here. I'm actually doing that with Fruity Love Filter. You can do stuff like automate the volume using an envelope. We don't actually have any of the filters enabled. You can see both of these are turned off, but we have the second voice with nothing on it. And we are using the Mod X to crossfade between them, essentially. Easy peasy. Just put that on everything. Second drop, basically the same process. We've got our lead sound. Our bass is under it. Our sub under that. And our saws to fill out the highs. And since there's still that gap in the low mids, no fancy crap this time, just dun dun dun. And then we get to the breakdown. Interesting little thing we did with this effect here. I actually bounced out the harpsichord from the first drop and mapped the pitch to an envelope. Put a bunch of delay on it, and you've got a neat little spin down effect. Sound design. So the harpsichord hook comes back. Except it's not quite the same. It's still got those pedal notes, but they're in different places. And the chords are different. We've even got this little part where we borrow some chords from A harmonic minor. And that sort of gives this labyrinthian feel, like you're getting lost in the hallways of this, what did I call it? Androgynous visual key power metal vampire aristocrat? Their castle. You don't really know where you are, everything's kind of going non-Euclidean, shall we say. For example, instead of one guitar solo, we've got two completely different parts playing at the same time and sort of trading off. So like, one of them will play a little run, then the other will, and they'll sort of trade off, harmonize, counterpoints and shit. Counterpoints, I guess. And sometimes they harmonize. And then we just straight up switch to 6/8. And then double time for some reason. All while the guitars are doing this sort of badly played, heavily edited sweep picking thing. Sweep picking is when you basically sweep your pick across the strings. It's mostly used for playing got a little practicing to do before I'm the next Luca Turilli, but we'll get there eventually. No, we won't. Add in the pizzicatos. Second part to harmonize with. And just when everything seems lost, and just when all hope seems lost, and our terrifying anime Vlad the Impaler is about to win, suddenly, we're back to the main theme. We can use that to sort of reset, and finally build the tension back up again for another drop. Rip my CPU. Trendy little stop time section. I don't even know what the hell this is, honestly. You might notice that we're not actually using the sub-oscillator for this. This is a fill, and I think that by cutting out the sub for some of the fills, we sort of create a bit of contrast that sort of helps move the song along by establishing dynamics. What we're doing here is pretty straightforward, honestly. We've got this, some noise, and we use a bandpass with really high resonance to turn that into something. Modulation. Big finale. We done, boy. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you brainwash the innocent with subliminal messages and then feast upon their blood. Enjoy.